Do not remove goggles or face first until 10 seconds after first light.
Oh, that can't be good at all.
Never was the scene supposed to be seen that almost ruined Indiana Jones. Long kept secret, the contentious clip depicts Indy engaging in an implausible action that even Harrison Ford pleaded with Spielberg to remove. Finally, after 4 decades, the truth comes out on how a $250,000 oversight caused the largest narrative hole in film history, and why fans are still clamoring for answers regarding the actual events on that Nazi submarine. George Lucas, who had a soft spot for adventure tales when he was a boy, was the inspiration for Indiana Jones. His formative years were spent engrossed in classic action flicks from the 30s and 40s, in which fearless protagonists faced off against dangerous foes in faraway lands. Lucas aimed to recreate that thrill for today's viewers. He envisioned a rugged, intelligent, and resourceful protagonist who was equal parts James Bond and the traditional explorer. The story of Raiders of the Lost Ark was heavily influenced by one of his major sources of inspiration, the Uncle Scrooge comic starring Scrooge McDuck, in which the duck sought riches in old ruins. Actually, there's a scenario that echoes Indy's iconic idol switch. Lucas drew inspiration for Indiana Jones from both fictional and real-life adventures. The 1920s explorer Roy Chapman Andrews, who dug for dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert, was a major inspiration. He resembled the ideal hero that Lucas had in mind, a fedora-wearing, gun-wielding figure. Actually, the inspiration for Chewbacca in Star Wars originated from Lucas's own dog, the one whose name was Indiana. Spielberg felt the name was too silly, so they changed it to Indiana Smith. Spielberg agreed with Lucas's offhand suggestion that they use Jones instead while they were in Hawaii in 1977. When Indy's dad commented, "We named the dog Indiana," they even made fun of it years later in The Last Crusade. The idea of helming a James Bond film has long been Spielberg's ambition. 2 times in 1977, producers rejected him on the grounds that he was too young. In the midst of their vacation, he vented his frustrations on Lucas. Grinning broadly, Lucas informed Spielberg, "I've got something better than Bond." He proceeded to describe his vision for Indiana Smith's epic escapades. Spielberg gushed about it, describing it as James Bond without the gadgets. Then they struck a deal with Paramount wherein Spielberg pledged to keep the budget low in order to save money, while Lucas was granted unlimited control over sequels. Spielberg overshot his 85-day production schedule for Raiders by just 73 days. He saved money by reusing Star Wars sets, filming interior sequences in a single day, and having Indy wear the same clothing for the whole of the film. Spielberg was never a fan of the name Indiana Smith, but it lingered for a while, modeled by actual archaeologists like Hiram Bingham, who discovered Machu Picchu while stealing its artifacts. The original screenplays depicted Indy as a renegade explorer who occasionally pilfered riches for his personal use. Because Spielberg wanted Indy to care about history and not only seek money, he was concerned that it made the character appear too self-centered. Spielberg envisioned Indy as more of a hero, whereas Lucas preferred the image of him as a gunslinger. They settled on a middle ground. Indy would be a hard worker who, at his core, would never compromise his principles. After much back and forth, the name was finally changed to Jones. "I wanted to make the movie. I didn't care if we called him Peanut Butter Sandwich," Lucas laughed afterward. It was a disaster to cast Indiana Jones. Filmmaker Steven Spielberg had previously envisioned Magnum PI actor Tom Selleck donning the hat and jacket for a full-screen test, but Selleck had to back out at the last minute because CBS wouldn't release him from his TV contract. Even after calling the network and pleading with them to fire Selleck, Lucas was unable to get him fired. Shooting was to begin in just 3 weeks, so they had to find a new lead quickly. Spielberg advocated for Harrison Ford, even though Lucas was against the idea because of his previous role as Han Solo and the potential negative associations with the Star Wars franchise. In addition to saving production money in a sequence that would go down in cinematic history, Ford received a salary that was only $1 million below than his potential earnings. Due to Ford's illness from food sickness, he was unable to participate in the lengthy duel that was planned for Indy and the swordsman during the Cairo sword fight. He just drew his revolver and shot the man instead. Spielberg liked it so much that he used it in the finished project, which saved the budget $150,000. Another major issue was the budget. Spending $20 million on an adventure picture with no assurance of success was too much for Paramount. Studio head Michael Eisner uttered the term boondoggle to describe the project's exorbitant expenses. In order to seal the agreement, Spielberg, fresh off the disastrous 1941, pledged to be extremely conservative with the budget, and Lucas consented to get a percentage of the earnings rather than payment in advance. To avoid squandering resources, he storyboarded each scenario. Regardless, with $389 million globally, Raiders of the Lost Ark became 1981's biggest blockbuster. While Spielberg and Lucas took home more than $50 million apiece, Paramount saw their profit share fall to 12%. The film demonstrated that huge adventure flicks might be profitable even without really large budgets. "We made a $40 million picture for half the price, and nobody noticed," Spielberg quipped afterward. However, much discussion was sparked by a particular incident. As the Nazi submarine crosses the ocean in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones manages the seemingly impossible feat of clinging to its periscope. Where is the issue? When a submarine dives to great depths, its periscopes descend with it. Still, Indy manages to stay alive on the periscope for 72 hours without succumbing to drowning in the film. Viewers were left to ponder, how could he breathe? The film never provides an explanation for it. How was he invisible to the crew? For years, this incident remained a topic of conversation. The New York Times ranked it as one of the most egregious narrative flaws in film history in 2008. Even at maximum speed, the submarine would require Indy to have extraordinary grip strength, according to the scientists. Spielberg said afterwards that he was in such a hurry to wrap the film that he was aware it didn't make sense. Supporters attempted to deduce why. It turned out that the notion that the submarine never went underwater was correct. The U-boat remained on the surface throughout, as shown in the cut clip. There was once a brief sequence that showed Indy whipping himself to the periscope to clarify this. Since submarine engines couldn't operate for very long below, this made perfect sense prior to Wadu, when the vessels mostly navigated above water to conserve fuel. The movie's Nazi submarine probably wouldn't have dove because it was traveling over 1,200 miles to a secret island. This justification was also incorporated in the 1981 Raiders comic, which depicted Indy losing his whip and hat on the journey. However, Spielberg's filming of it made it appear absurd. Test viewers made fun of Harrison Ford for seeming so foolish as he clumsily clung to a mock periscope. While Spielberg's decision to eliminate the sequence saved $250,000, it did leave a huge vacuum in the storyline. The sequence was deleted from the 1999 film, and Spielberg subsequently said in a DVD commentary that he regretted the decision. A pixelated VHS tape with the cut scenes eventually made it online in 2012, where it amassed over 2.8 million views. On a Raiders Blu-ray, Paramount included storyboards for the sequence after seeing the buzz. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, set in 2023, features the same joke. A youthful Indy adds, "Don't ask about the submarine." The scenario ultimately fails to make sense, but fans adore it anyhow. It's a big part of what makes Indy seem like a legend. In defense of it, Harrison Ford said, "The audience wants to believe he's indestructible. Why ruin it with math?" However, there were other contentious scenes as well. There was a sequence in 1984's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom that viewers will never forget. In a disturbing ceremony, the head of an enigmatic sect named Mola Ram seems to use his magical abilities to take a man's heart. As his lifeless body is dropped into a pit of fire, his chanting supporters around him. Never before have audiences witnessed such a dramatic moment in an adventure film. Back then, special effects weren't as impressive. The producers created the appearance of the wound magically closing itself by using a rubber chess piece and reversing the movie. On the other hand, other television adaptations eliminated the heart entirely, turning Mola Ram's deeds into a mystifying ritual rather than a dramatic display of violence. Real fire was used to lower the actor playing the victim behind the scenes. Many factors, including audience reaction to this sequence, contributed to a long-lasting shift in movie ratings. Both critics and parents felt the picture should have been rated adults only because of its graphic content, which they felt was too severe for younger viewers. Consequently, a whole new category was born in Hollywood: PG-13. A darker plot involving child labor was also added in the film, which is unusual for major adventure films. The narrative takes place in an underground mine where a gang of youngsters are kidnapped and made to work for magical stones. Under the cult leader's directions, the young performers struggled in scenes set in tunnels with low lighting. Some thought the film drew too much from historical events, despite its intended fantastical tone. The film took a dramatic, fictionalized account of accusations made against an Indian secret society by British officials in the 1800s and made them feel considerably worse. Several reviewers believe that the tale treated the pain of children too carelessly, treating it as if it were simply another obstacle that Indiana Jones needed to conquer. A stressful scene occurred when Indy's youthful sidekick, Short Round, attempted to flee from the cult members as they treated him cruelly. Some nations restricted the film's release due to scenes like these and the general graphic nature of the content. Because of the Indian government's belief that it portrayed an inflated and false picture of Indian culture, it was even prohibited. Even the dinner scenario at Pankot Palace caused some eyebrows to rise. Monkey brains, live baby snakes, and soup with strange ingredients are among the strange delicacies offered to Indiana Jones and his companions during their supper. Even though these delicacies weren't actually Indian, the setting gave the impression that they were part of some bizarre and exotic tradition. Spielberg eventually came clean about the fact that these concepts were based on urban legends rather than actual events. The film's depiction of a prominent religious person in the plot also angered Hindu organizations. Many people were unhappy with the film's portrayal of the cult, which worships Ki, a god often viewed as a protector. Mola Ram's actor Amrish Puri had reservations about playing the part. Spielberg had to persuade him that it was all in his head before he could accept. Because of the intense backlash, the producers had to reschedule their shot from India to Sri Lanka, where they constructed sets to wrap out the film. Decades after its release, debates persist about whether Temple of Doom represented a daring artistic decision or a distortion of cultural heritage. Spielberg later said that of all the Indiana Jones films, he disliked Temple of Doom the worst. He added that his divorce and other personal struggles informed the film's harsher tone, and that he thought co-writer George Lucas was in a bad mood when they were writing the script. Spielberg expressed concern about the film's racial stereotypes after the fact, although he justified the film's violent sequences by claiming that such stories require formidable antagonists. Additionally, he brought out the fact that the movie's cult was designed to be fictitious and not based on real events. It was only an adversary that Indiana Jones would face. At the same time, Raiders of the Lost Ark had planned a massive, thrilling sword fight, including him. Instead of swiftly drawing a rifle, Indiana Jones was initially planned to engage in a lengthy, exciting combat with a skilled swordsman that lasted about 10 minutes. He would defend himself using a variety of methods, including whipping out blows, grabbing the sword mid-swing, and even hanging meat from market stalls. Despite appearances to the contrary, the swordsman was actually a Nazi agent attempting to foil Indy's plans to locate Marion. In order to make Indy appear totally outclassed, actor Terry Richards spent weeks practicing for the fight, mastering difficult maneuvers including a 10-hit combination. Spielberg aimed for an old-school adventure film vibe, complete with humor and peril. But after that, things took a turn for the worst. The circumstances for filming in Tunisia were harsh, and the heat was intolerable. After consuming contaminated water, Harrison Ford contracted dysentery, which left him weak, dehydrated, and incontinent. Ford was hardly able to stand for more than 10 minutes at a time when the fight was intended to be filmed. The company had already invested $150,000 in preparation for this battle, so Spielberg was adamant on keeping everything the same. However, Ford was absolutely worn out. "Why don't we just shoot the guy?" he asked Spielberg at one point. That joke changed the course of cinema forever. They filmed 2 takes, one with the whole brawl, and another with Indy just drawing his rifle and killing the swordsman. After seeing both, Spielberg came to the realization that the gun sequence was more fitting for Indy's character and also funny. He was a cunning hero who would have rather spent his time doing whatever it necessary to stay alive than wasting it on pointless battles. Additionally, the revised scenario saved $250,000 in 3 days of production. Almost 80% of the staff and actors became ill in Tunisia, so Ford wasn't the only one who suffered. Cinematographer Douglas Slocum was also attached to an IV and had to work while attached. Still, they managed to wrap the film, and that rapid gunfire is now infamous in the annals of action cinema. Even though Spielberg eventually decided to cancel the planned battle, some of it had already been filmed. See Indy dangling from a market stall, Terry Richards executing a backflip to evade the whip, and a hilarious scenario when the swordsman inadvertently cuts through a butcher's meat, prompting the butcher to bow in appreciation, all in the behind-the-scenes film. Even though the entire battle was cut from the film, there are still clips of it online. In an alternate 1981 Raiders comic, Indy disarms the swordsman rather than shoots him. In 2012, on the Raiders Blu-ray, there was some practice film showing Ford and Richards rehearsing the battle. For years, fans have been fixated on this cut sequence. In 1999, a VHS of the rehearsal video was auctioned on eBay for $100, and in 2003, 12,000 fans signed a petition requesting a version of the film that featured the whole battle. A brief excerpt from the deleted scene gained over 2 million views in only 1 week upon its release on the 2012 Blu-ray. After using AI to restore the old footage in 2023, the question of whether Spielberg was correct arose once again. There were those who thought Lucas intentionally deleted the video so it wouldn't affect Indy's whip bouts in subsequent films. In addition, there's a sequence in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull that stunned viewers to no end. By taking refuge in a refrigerator, Indy manages to escape a nuclear blast. Indy emerges unscathed from the blast that sends the refrigerator hurtling through the sky for more than a mile before it finally touches down. Reactions to the image persisted for years, despite its brief duration of around 2.5 minutes. Their jaws dropped at the sight that had just unfolded. They thought it was completely implausible, ludicrous, and reduced their beloved hero, Indiana Jones, to a cartoon. Nuking the fridge started to be used to indicate when a franchise goes overboard and loses its charm, similar to how jumping the shark came to be used to describe when a show or movie goes bad. Back to the Future was the real inspiration behind the refrigerator, which is something that most people don't realize. Like Indy, Marty McFly would have escaped a nuclear explosion by hiding inside a nuclear-powered refrigerator, according to an early 1984 draft. The scene would have taken place at a Nevada test site. The fear that children would attempt to climb into refrigerators and become imprisoned led Spielberg, who was producing Back to the Future, to decide to scrap the idea. Years later, while filming Indiana Jones 4, he recalled the concept and chose to use it. Even though the location changed, the scene with the fridge remained mostly unchanged. Even the original Back to the Future storyboards reveal the striking similarities between the two films. The moment Indiana Jones 4 was released, though, specialists wasted little time in disproving the scene's impossibility. Nuclear scientists looked into it and came up with many ways Indy may have perished. To begin with, The explosion would have hurled the refrigerator at a speed of around 800 miles per hour. Upon contact, he would have been crushed, experiencing a force of more than 450 Gs, a force sufficient to render his internal organs liquid. The radiation would have been lethal even if he managed to survive it. The phrase "nuking the fridge" became a web trend only 2 days after the film's release, indicating the level of fan outrage. Some even went so far as to declare it was worse than Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars, another renowned property that had the worst edition ever. The $790 million box office haul wasn't enough to appease the moviegoers. Spielberg later expressed sorrow for the scene. He made the statement, "I take full responsibility," in 2011. "Nobody will buy this," Harrison Ford warned me, but I persisted nonetheless. While he first didn't mind that "nuked the fridge" became a meme, he eventually came to realize that it had a negative impact on the Indiana Jones series. But Lucas would not acknowledge guilt. He went so far as to claim he had a file 6 inches thick with scientific evidence that the scene might indeed occur, but scientists dismissed his claims as ridiculous. There was also an important sequence that was cut from Raiders of the Lost Ark that would have provided further context on the Ark. While visiting Imam in Cairo, Indy and Saleh had a portion of their chat cut. The original script for the film had Imam reading a warning from the Ark's headpiece that read, "If you touch the Ark, you die. If you look at the Ark when it is opened, you die." However, this scene was cut to improve the pacing of the film, which leaves the audience to wonder how Indy was told to close his eyes at the end. If that moment had remained, it would have shown him that he had been warned before. Another sequence with Saleh that was cut from the final cut was a comedic one. After losing the rope that would have allowed him to assist Indy in escaping the map room, he had to come up with a quick solution. He used a Nazi flag and some stolen bedsheets to create a rope. Even unintentionally scorching a young German soldier with hot tea was an accident he had in one take. Spielberg removed the sequence because it didn't fit the serious tone of the movie. John Rhys Davies, who portrayed Saleh, wrote up some words on the spot, and his performance was so humorous that Karen Allen and producer Frank Marshall couldn't stop laughing. In retrospect, Rhys Davies proclaimed it to be his funniest moment. Raiders of the Lost Ark remains one of the best action pictures of all time, despite the removal of some of these sequences. The last scene's dissolving faces were realistically made using 12 tons of clay and 177,000 watts of light. The spectral figures were hand-drawn tracings of genuine dancers used to create a spooky effect. The entire sequence cost more over $1.2 million, which was a substantial sum in 1981. When it was released, Raiders of the Lost Ark wasn't your average action flick. A new era began in Hollywood. It sparked an interest in the past. People still like it over 40 years after it offered them a hero who wasn't flawless, but kept trying. The Indiana Jones films were groundbreaking for adventure cinema, and they had a profound impact on vocations as well as on actual archaeologists. Harrison Ford was famous as Han Solo in Star Wars before portraying Indiana Jones, but following Raiders, his career took off. He shot to fame and became one of Hollywood's biggest performers. Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, his Star Wars co-stars, had trouble securing major parts, while Harrison Ford continued scoring hits. Air Force One, Blade Runner, and The Fugitive were all films in which he starred. People would always remember him as Indiana Jones, regardless of how many films he made. His charisma, resilience, and ability to get back up after falling were indelible. The role of Marion Ravenwood, performed by Karen Allen, was similarly memorable. Marion changed the game for female action movie characters before Raiders. She possessed intelligence, strength, and the courage to face down any adversary, including Indy. Many aspiring action women looked up to her. Allen stayed closely associated with Indiana Jones, making cameo appearances in Dial of Destiny and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, while devoting more time to theater and directing. It demonstrated that her character was still beloved by fans. Success came to other series actors as well. Actor John Rhys Davies, who played Saleh, shot to stardom after appearing in The Lord of the Rings. Actor Paul Freeman became famous for his portrayal of charming villains like Belloq, who was both cunning and charismatic. While Alfred Molina went on to portray Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2, Ke Huy had a small role in Temple of Doom, but subsequently won an Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once. And Ke Huy had a tremendous return after playing Short Round. The impact of Indiana Jones extended well beyond the lives of the film's performers. The film altered audiences' perceptions of the past. More students began to pursue archaeology after Raiders. There was an uptick in enrollment at institutions like the University of Chicago. True archaeologists don't actually avoid explosives or huge stones, but even they have to concede that Indiana Jones sparked a lot of interest in the subject. In an effort to make learning about the past feel as exciting as exploring new territories, television series and documentaries began utilizing a similar blend of history and adventure. Additionally, Indy's appearance became legendary. His leather jacket, fedora, and whip all shouted adventure. Deborah Naderman, the costume designer, drew inspiration from actual 1930s explorers for the appearance of Indiana Jones. Not long after, other films began to mimic it, including Jumanji, The Mummy, and even computer games like Uncharted. His spectacles and tweed suit, which gave him the air of a professor, only served to heighten his charisma and reveal that he was equal parts scholar and adventurer. The action film industry was the most profoundly affected by Indiana Jones. Adventure films lacked the tempo, energy, and originality shown in Raiders. Elements popularized in the Indiana Jones films eventually established Hollywood norms. Films such as Tomb Raider and National Treasure were inspired by the concept of unraveling ancient secrets. Personas like John McClane from Die Hard were made possible by the concept of a flawed hero who was human and could make errors, get weary, and be terrified. Video games such as Assassin's Creed were even impacted by the manner in which Indiana Jones utilized real-life locales, ranging from Nepal to Venice. As a whole, the films revolutionized the industry. Some of the finest action sequences of all time have been created using practical effects rather than computer-generated imagery. Examples of this are the minecart scene in Temple of Doom and the enormous boulder chase in Raiders. Steven Spielberg's direction impacted subsequent directors such as J.J. Abrams, while John Williams' score became as iconic as Star Wars and Jaws. Dial of Destiny's subsequent director James Mangold helped produce the film alongside Abrams. Obviously, there were certain flaws in the series. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull's extraterrestrial plotline felt out of place, and Temple of Doom's use of stereotypes and denigration of Indian culture were other points of criticism. No matter how you felt about them, these films certainly contributed to the ongoing conversation around Indiana Jones. There is no sign of Indiana Jones fading from popular culture even now. A true word in archaeology, the Indiana Jones effect highlights how popular culture can make history attractive for new generations. The character continues to be popular in new video games like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, while indie-themed attractions and Lego sets continue to sell. The narrative of Indiana Jones comes to a close in 2023 with the release of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The 80-year-old Harrison Ford came back for a final outing. The film delves into themes of aging, legacy, and the aftermath of a hero's waning powers. Even if Indy's adventure is finished, his legacy will live on, and the farewell was full of nostalgia. For nearly 4 decades, the Indiana Jones films have been more than just a series of films. They have launched careers, transformed history into an exciting adventure, revolutionized action films, and bestowed upon the world a hero who even now serves as a constant reminder that true adventure isn't merely about finding treasure, but also about bravery, inquisitiveness, and perseverance. Indy once said, "It's not the years, honey, it's the mileage." And the truth is, the journey never ends regardless of the passing of time.